love now and
Did you fall in love? Just tell I love you.
Love was stronger than anything.
Feel the love.
And I love you more than anything.
There's still love.
From the New York Times, I'm Anna Martin. This is Modern Love. I'm just gonna say it because, there's no use hiding it. I am about to turn 30. Yes, you heard it, 30, the big 30. I'm not freaking out at all. Of course I am. I've been taking a lot of time to reflect on my 20s now that I'm almost out of them. And I keep thinking about how deeply confusing my early 20s were. I feel like I went through a kind of second puberty at that time, just one where I could legally drink and I had to pay rent. Even though I dated a lot, I hadn't ever really been in love because I wasn't ready for it. When Zoe Fishman's essay starts, that's where she was too, in that weird, exhilarating early 20s part of her life, where finding love was still a long ways off. Zoe was living in Brooklyn, trying to make it as a writer. She was smoking cigarettes at apartment parties. She basically had nothing figured out. So I had to ask, was it as Frances Ha as it sounds?
It was maybe like Frances Ha Steen, like the Jewish Frances Ha.
I love that.
But any connection to Greta Gerwig is welcomed and applauded.
Of course.
It was a wonderful, self-involved life filled with incredible girlfriends, a lot of dating, but never a relationship.
That's why when Zoe met a guy at a party, a guy she couldn't take her eyes off of, she thought, okay, he's cute, that's that. But for some reason, she just couldn't get him out of her mind. Unlike any other infatuation she'd ever had, her crush just kept intensifying, and it wouldn't go away for years. Zoe, you write in your essay that you're at a party one night and you meet someone special. Tell me his name and tell me about him.
His name was Ronen. He was tall, dark, Israeli. He had big brown eyes and just a beautiful head of black hair and broad shoulders. He just was, to me, the epitome of male beauty.
He sounds hot.
He was hot. He was very hot. But he was dating a friend of mine. I left that night just thinking about him and wondering, would he and my coworker last? Would I ever see him again? It's just one of those moments where you remember that you're a sexual being and there is such a thing as electricity and chemistry and all your senses are tingling.
After that party, did you see Ronen again?
Only occasionally on the subway in the mornings on the way to work.
Wait, were you guys at the same stop?
Yes, we both left in the morning for work from the Carroll Gardens F stop.
Oh my God. Do you remember the first time that you saw him on your commute?
I do remember watching him. It's a crowded train. Everybody is relatively miserable.
Yeah.
And on their way to work. And I remember he would sit with headphones on and a book out.
Oh, double.
Yeah, double. It was an impenetrable facade. But every time I saw him, it was the same kind of electrical jolt. And I was too nervous to say hello to him. I just thought, what if he is a jerk? What if he says, I have no idea who you are? Then I would have to switch my car on the train. Like,
oh my God.
Who has time for that? So I would rather, or at that time, I'd rather him be this kind of God on a pedestal than an actual person. And I told my friends about him, they thought I was ridiculous for not saying hello. And so he became my subway crush.
Oh, but I mean, you did think about approaching him several times, right?
Oh, for sure. I thought about it all the time. I would almost get up the nerve. And then I got off before him. I got off at 23rd and would just lose my nerve. At one point, I had even written a note. So I had written, "You're my subway crush," put my number on it, folded it into a tiny piece of paper, my hands sweating. And I was all ready. And he was standing right by the door.
No.
And then I chickened out.
Oh, so
I know.
Gosh, the note already folded up. What? So Zoe, how long did this crushing on Ronen from afar go on for?
Around 6 years.
6 years.
6 years.
6 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what do you think made him so hard to forget?
You know, I'm not a particularly wackadoo person.
Mm-hmm.
I really felt there was something inside of me that was telling me that we had some kind of destined meeting ahead of us. And, you know, for the most part, my intuition is pretty reliable. So even though I couldn't approach him, I just knew we would cross paths in a tangible way at some point because I couldn't shake his face.
And your intuition proved correct, right? You did finally reconnect with Ronen. Tell me about the moment that you guys talked again.
Wow, I remember it so well. It was a Saturday, and I was going into the city to meet friends. And at this time, you could wait outside to see the F train coming. There was a platform outside as well and inside. So I saw him standing outside as I went down the steps, and my heart was racing. I thought, today's the day. It's a Saturday. The train's not crowded. What's the worst that can happen? And so I was ready. I was sweating. I remember my palms were sweating profusely. I got on the train. I looked around, and he wasn't on it.
No,
and I thought,
but he'd been on the platform.
I know. Where did he go? Where did he go? And then the door went to close, and a hand stopped the doors from closing. And the hand belonged to him.
No.
I know.
No.
I know.
He wrenched the door open?
He wrenched the door open.
Stop. What did your heart do? What did your body do?
My heart flip-flopped. My stomach sank. I think I was probably shaking a little because I would not let myself not say hello to him. So then he gets onto the train, and right behind him are my former coworker who used to date him. And her then husband.
Oh my gosh. So the original connection, the person who introduced you was there. But it's clear they're not together anymore because she's with her new husband.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So everything was aligned. It was time, finally. They were sitting on the seats that look out the windows. I was sitting on a seat that faced them, but I would say half a car away. And I remember I was reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics.
I'm like, my whole body is like on the edge of my seat. I cannot, I don't know that book, but it sounds incredibly smart.
And I had it on me, and I had it open on my lap and was pretending to read, but absolutely wasn't. Telling myself, get up, so, just say hi to her. And then I went to get up. And sure enough, she was approaching me. And she said, "Zoe," and, we hugged. And right behind her, Ronen walked up. And I looked up at him, and I just blurted out, "I see you on the subway all the time." I know. And he said, "I see you on the subway all the time." And it was, yes, it really was that. It was like a fairy tale. I describe it as all of a sudden flowers started growing out of the cracks of concrete outside. Vines and beautiful exotic birds began swooping through the decrepit subway car. I felt so alive.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, You have to forgive my like audible reactions. I was on a roller coaster with you there just because like when you finally get the gumption, he has seen you too. That is the dream.
It was astounding. And I walked up the subway steps and I remember the sky that day. It was May, and so it was just starting to be spring in New York. And I just felt in my heart, this is it. This is the guy that you're going to marry. It was crazy. I had never, to be that confident about anything other than writing was unheard of for me. But I really felt it. It felt very powerful.
So how did you two actually end up together?
So he had just gotten out of a relationship. And so days went by and I didn't hear from him. I didn't hear from my friend.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little bit, that way you are when you're waiting for someone to call and they're not calling.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was a bridesmaid in my friend's wedding in Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
I was waiting in the airport and I got an email from the mutual friend. And she said, Ronen is asking about you.
Yes.
You mind if I give him your number?
And you're like, do I mind?
Yeah.
This is the culmination of 6 years of pining.
Here's my social security number, my weight, my height, my eye color.
I'm actually on a plane to you right now. Yeah.
I'm canceling this wedding.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was that all weekend I was just on a high thinking about actually speaking to him, doing something with him.
What was your first date? Your first official date?
First official date. So he ended up living 2 blocks away from me.
Oh my gosh.
I was on 3rd place and he was on 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And so we met on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And we got engaged a year after that. We were married 2 years after we met.
Tell me a little bit about your wedding day.
Oh, it was lovely. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and we got married in Orange Beach. Beautiful, beautiful beach. And the day started cloudy and then it gave way to sun. And I remember seeing him standing, waiting for me under the chuppah and just feeling like the luckiest, the happiest, which is terrifying a little bit, but also just so beautiful. It was a beautiful day.
What's the terrifying component that you're hitting on?
I think that the forever of it all.
Mm-hmm.
What if I let him down? What if, real life gets in the way of this magic?
We'll be right back. Okay, so soon after you and Ronen got married, you had your first boy named Ari, and then you had your second boy named Lev. So your fairy tale love story kind of continued, right?
It did.
Mm-hmm. Did being a father come naturally to Ronen?
Mm-hmm. He was such a tactile person. That was something that was incredible about him too. He lived to touch and hug and snuggle and kiss and sweat and run and taste. And being a father really brought that out in him.
Mm-hmm. So you and Ronen are figuring things out as young parents. You're doing your best with your 2 boys. Can you bring me into the day things changed, that day in 2017?
Yeah. We had just moved in to our first home, and it was a normal morning. Lev was 2 days away from turning 2, and so family was coming into town that afternoon. And we said goodbye to Ronen in the morning. I remember what he was wearing. He was wearing a blue and white polka dotted shirt, green pants. His bag was slung over his shoulder. He took a bite of Ari's peanut butter waffle, kissed him, kissed us, And then he just walked out the door. Later that day, we were supposed to see him at my mother-in-law's, his mother's house for dinner because my parents were in town. And I hadn't heard from him all day, which was strange. And he didn't show up for dinner. And we kept calling him and he didn't answer. And then finally we called and the ER picked up and said we needed to come right away. I was numb. His mother was doing what she had to do, getting us in the car. Thankfully, my parents were there to watch the boys. And I remember the car ride, and I remember not really speaking, just holding hands. We get to the ER. This woman takes our hands and leads us through these fluorescent corridors to a tiny room, the kind of room that you see on TV, the kind of room that always bears bad news. And we went in and 2 doctors came in and said, he's had a brain aneurysm on a level from 1 to 5. This is a 5. His brain is filled with blood. And I just blurted out, is he going to die? And they couldn't answer me.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it felt like I was watching a really sad movie about someone else's life. It didn't feel like my life, even though it very clearly was. And then we were in the hospital with him for a week. He was on life support. He somehow had the knowledge, and he was very sincere about this. We had a will, and he had made me his executor, and he did not want to be hooked up to machines. And so a week later, we took him off, and
my God,
he died.
How old was he when he passed?
He was 44.
How did you explain what happened to Ari and Lev?
So the week he was in the hospital, I came home every night, made sure to put them to bed, and told them that he was sick, and the doctors were doing everything they could. But the night that he died, they were asleep. And so I had to wake them up the next morning. Lev was still in a crib. And so Ari was sleeping with me. We woke up, we walked down to Lev's room, we got him out, we put him on the floor, and I just held their hands, and I remember their tiny faces, and I just said, Abba died. And at that age, they didn't even know what that meant, but they saw how sad I was. And they kind of bowed their heads, and they said, will we ever get another Abba? And I said, not like him. And that was kind of it. And an hour later, they were playing with their toys. They didn't understand that, they were never going to see him again.
Can you describe a bit for me those first couple days without him? How were you processing what was happening for you?
I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't compute.
You are now a single mom. You're raising your 2 boys alone. As you sunk more and more into that reality, what it meant for you, how were you coping?
So Ronen died the summer before Ari started kindergarten. And so I walked Ari in by myself. That was one of the most that was almost as painful as acknowledging and realizing that he was gone. Because this was a huge, monumental moment in Ari's life. It was also the first of many, hopefully, starts to school years. And all around me were husbands. I really walked home sobbing. And I just put one foot in front of the other and got home. But it just felt so unfair.
Yeah.
And not just for me, but for Ari. And for Ronen, for God's sake. He didn't get to live. it'll never make sense to me. And it certainly did not make sense to me in that moment.
In those moments, did you find yourself like talking to him in some way?
I wrote him letters. So I had, like maybe 50 pages just telling him what was happening with the boys, what was happening with me, when I was missing him. I would close my eyes and try to speak to him, but I didn't hear him back. So on the page, it felt more like me. It felt like I was going to send that email, And the only time I heard him was the morning after he went into the coma. We spent the night at the hospital. We came home. I was washing my face in the bathroom sink at his mom's house. And I closed the door and the lights flickered. And I heard, "I'm sorry, I love you." I don't know if I was absolutely delirious because I didn't sleep or in the absolute throes of grief, but I heard his voice. And so I answered him and I said, "Please don't be sorry. It's not your fault."
You didn't hear him anymore after that?
No, I never heard his voice again. And I longed for it, or just any sort of, otherworldly occurrence, but they just weren't happening.
You do write in your essay that even though, you haven't been able to hear Ronen, even though you haven't been able to see him, you have found this way that you're able to connect. Can you tell me about that?
So Lev is a very tactile person, the same way Ronen was. Ronen used to do this thing where I would hug him and he would say harder, harder until, squeezed like his tongue out of his mouth, popped out of his mouth. And Lev does the same thing.
Had he heard his dad do that?
No.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. And Ari stands like Ronen did. Ronen used to put his hands like on his hips when he was standing on the soccer field and kind of arch his back. Ari has the exact same stature. They also say the loveliest things to me that I would assume young boys don't normally say to their mothers. And it sounds like Ronen speaking through them.
What do they say if you are willing to share?
Lev would tell me I was with him swimming at a friend's pool, and he kind of came up out of the shallow end. I could feel him looking at me. And I, touched my head nervously, like what was that bird crap, like dripping down my forehead. But he said, "Ima, you look so beautiful." I think he was 4.
Wow.
And I thought, of course I started crying because it didn't feel like it was him saying it. And Ari in the same way, tucking him in the night and him telling me as I closed the door, "You're much more beautiful than you think you are," which is just insane.
Oh,
It's like, but you're 7. How do you know?
You're much more beautiful than you think you are.
I know.
I completely agree with you. That does not feel like something a 7-year-old would say, would know how to say. What does that feel like?
It feels like Ronen. I really do believe that DNA makes up a soul. And they didn't have enough time with him to model their behavior on him. I really feel that it flows in their veins. It's so affirming to me in that, when you lose someone in such a sudden way that you love so greatly. My reaction was to doubt any hope of any sort of God or any sort of purpose on this earth other than to just live in your body and then die, and that's it. But the way he shows up in them is so spiritual to me and does make me think there's a higher purpose and there's a higher meaning to all of this.
But also, I imagine, must be quite intense to be reminded of Ronen and your loss. How do you hold those things at the same time?
You know, I'm always so grateful to be reminded of him. It doesn't matter in what context, because grief for me has meant that as years have passed, it's become harder and harder to remember what it felt to be loved like that, to be married, to be part of this bonded team. I see the pictures. I know it was me. I know I was blessed. But I don't remember how it felt. And so anytime someone brings him up, or anytime I see him or hear him, it's a reminder that we existed. And I'll take that any day of the week. It's also a reminder of my own strength. If there's ever a moment where I think I can't do something, I think back to that first year, and I know I can.
You and Ronen, those 6 years watching him in the subway station. You don't live in New York anymore, but have you been back to that station since?
I have, and I've ridden the F with Ari and Lev. And I certainly cried. But it's still one of the greatest memories of my life, a moment that we met. And I would do it all over again.
So, thank you so much. I really feel like I learned from you today. Thank you.
Oh, my absolute pleasure.
This is our last episode of the season. We're going to take a little break and we'll be back in February with more Modern Love stories. Modern Love is produced by Julia Botero, Christina Josa, and Riva Goldberg. It's edited by Mark Pagan. Our executive producer is Jen Poyant. This episode was mixed by Daniel Ramirez. Our show was recorded by Maddie Masiello. The Modern Love theme music is by Dan Powell. Original music by Dan Powell, Pat McCusker, and Daniel Ramirez. Digital production by Mahima Chablani and Nell Galogli. The Modern Love column is edited by Daniel Jones. Mia Lee is the editor of Modern Love Projects. I'm Anna Martin. Thanks for listening.